larger circle towards the bottom half of my page, I would say make it about the size of like a softball. A nice big grapefruit is also a good size here. And really try to use your shoulder when you're drawing in your circles. Your shoulder naturally makes those circular motions, so always recommend it here when you're drawing. Of course, your circles don't have to be perfect either, because this is not his entire head shape. It is going to change, it's going to expand from here outward. So don't worry too much about the shape of your circle. With your circles though in place, I'm going to go in here and add a guideline. Just right through here, just a vertical one right through the center. And I'm also going to pull that line all the way up my paper. The second circle I'm going to stack right on top of my first, and it's going to be a little bit smaller. I would say if this is the size of a grapefruit, this is maybe an orange, or you can even go smaller, like a tangerine might be okay as well here. And you can see my circles overlap. So do make sure that they kind of crisscross at some point here, just a little bit. Now that we've got our two circles stacked on top of each other, we can kind of combine them from the sides. He doesn't have this weird dip here on the side of his head, so what we're going to do to combine the sides here is just bring down this very slight letter C curve. It dips in ever so slightly, not too much, so it should look like you've got a pear on your paper. And this right here is a good base for Eeyore, but if of course it doesn't look anything like it right now. But we can add a few more guidelines to help us with the placement of his features though. I'm going to add a horizontal line, cutting this larger circle here in half. So for me that's about here, and I'll just go right across. I'm also going to do another horizontal line right where my two circles overlap. So I'll go ahead here and add another horizontal line. And now that I've got my two guidelines here in place, I can start on the very first, the easiest feature here for Eeyore, which is his smile. And now this character is definitely not known to smile too much or too often, but whenever he is around his friends, he does seem to be his most happiest. So we want to give him a nice big smile here because he's surrounded by a bunch of friends. But these little letter C curves here on either side of our first horizontal line, or lower one here, those are not quite his smiles, but it is his cheeks. They're being pushed up here on either side to show us he's smiling nice and big. On the inside here, right up against the side of my circle, I'm going to add a little rainbow curve here. So that way this can indicate to us he's smiling so nice and big. He's got these little smile lines that then push out his cheeks. And his smile is that curve here of the bottom of his nose as well. So I'm going to take a pic of all my favorite lines here just for the bottom half of his face, and I'm going to lock them into place. Now locking in simply means we are darkening up our favorite lines here, really making them a permanent part of our sketch. But if you don't quite like your lines, keep them nice and light. Don't darken them in just yet. If you keep sketching lightly, it'll really help you find the lines you like, and those you can go back and darken in later. Don't have to darken in just because I am. But with his smile here locked into place, we can even add his nostrils here on the bottom half of his face. And his nostrils look like little apple seeds or watermelon seeds here, just sitting at a little bit of a diagonal. So I'm going to go underneath my horizontal line on either side of my vertical one here, adding in these two very thin, very small ovals. And this right here completes just about his nose, but we do want to connect his snout across so we can separate the different textures, the texture on his snout and the rest of his fur. So what we can do is actually use his cheeks here to guide us along the way. So we're going to bring up and over a big rainbow curve to connect with the bottom of our smaller circle here. And this will give us that completed snout here for Eeyore. Now Eeyore here, he is one of many stuffed animals that we see through the 100-acre woods. Can you guys name the other stuffed animals? Tigger, Blue Bear, absolutely. Kanga, Roo, Piglet, absolutely. And I think that's everybody, yeah. Owl, Tigger, and Gopher are actually not stuffed animals. Do you want to take a guess as to how we know that? Their eyes, yes, we got it. And their eyes actually tell us that they're not stuffed animals. In fact, they're real animals that Christopher Robin plays with out in the woods. Now, the reason we can tell is because their eyes. Stuffed animals will oftentimes have buttons for eyes, solid black ovals, nothing too fancy schmancy. But the rest of the animals have these realistic eyes that help us determine or distinguish them as real animals as opposed to the rest of the stuffed animals that live in the 100-acre wood. Now, Eeyore here, he's technically an exception because how we draw him is with those realistic eyes. And those realistic eyes really help him convey emotion because he is a little bit of a gloomy Gus. So we do want to see a little bit more behind his eyes, and buttons we're going to make it a little bit difficult. So for his eyes here, we're going to sketch right on top of our horizontal line these nice big ovals here to really wake him up. Now, he definitely isn't the type of character who his eyes are always super wide awake. He's definitely a little bit more like half asleep the majority of the time here, so we're going to give him some eyelids here right at the very top. I would say top third or even top fourth of your oval. We're going to add this little half rainbow curve here, this diagonal line to give him some eyelids. And the pupil, that's up to you. You could draw hearts or stars in there, make him look super happy or excited. You could also draw in little rain clouds, or maybe he's like crying, so there's tears in there. And there's so many different ways to change this character, make it unique to you by just how you change their eyes. You'd always have him looking at your neighbor, maybe he's trying to be silly, so he's cross-eyed in your sketch. Or you can keep it nice and simple with some tall ovals. I'm going to have them looking forward at all of you guys. And if you are going to draw the oval, make sure you draw the whole thing, not just a letter C inside of his eyes. Otherwise, he does tend to look a little cross-eyed. But nice and big here with these ovals, really filling up whatever space here we have in his eyes. And no matter the shape you decided to draw, make sure you shade them in nice and bold. The eyes are the most important part of your character. This is where the emotion and really who they are comes from. So you really want to make sure it's nice and bold and prominent. Now we can also add a few extra detail here between his eyes and his nose. He's got a few little creases here to kind of make him look tired all the time. So I'm going to add in these little half-letter U's or letter C's here underneath. And another thing that really helps let us know as the audience that he's a stuffed animal are all his seam lines. So this vertical line here is running right through the center of his face. I'm going to lock it into place so we know this is a seam. And it has a few stitches that run right along it. Now I'm only going to add a couple, like maybe a couple on his face and a couple on his snout. If you add too many, he starts to look like a little bit more of a Tim Burton character, which can be kind of frightening sometimes. But now that we've got his eyes and his muzzle complete, we can add in his eyebrows to complete his face here as well. And they kind of sit at a little bit of a sloping angle here. So I'll add these rainbows right above his eyes. And to thicken them up, I'll start through the inner corner here by adding a number 1 for each eyebrow. We can add another rainbow here to connect the tail ends and shade them in nice and bold here so they really stand out on our sketch. A lot of the way the characters looked here actually come from the illustrated books illustrated by E.H. Shepard. Now, they were written by a gentleman named A.A. Milne, who was writing stories about his real son, Christopher Robin. A lot of these characters were actually based off of his own stuffed animals. Tigger, unfortunately though, he was not a stuffed animal. I guess that's not really unfortunate. It's fortunate because he was a real dog that they owned. Not a tiger. It was a dog named Chung, and that's who they based Tigger's personality off of. He was super bouncy, super crazy. He loved to greet people. But the rest of these animals here were all Christopher Robin's own stuffed animals. Now, Eeyore here, he was a little bit older of a stuffed animal, and he wasn't filled with fluff and stuff. He was actually filled with sawdust. And so whenever he would sit on the shelf, his head would lean down just a little bit more than all the rest. And that's really where his gloomy personality came from. It was just because he was literally heavier than the other stuffed animals. And I blocked in the sides of his head here, and his hair is part of his mane. It's supposed to look a little bit like he's always got bedhead. So I'm going to draw a bunch of crazy little wisps here for the top of his hair, but you can change this up. You could give him an Elsa braid, you could give him really long Rapunzel hair, you can kind of have fun with this as well. But if you're going to stick with the original look here for Eeyore, it's just a bunch of these crazy little wisps or blades of grass or shark fin shapes here to create the very, like, I just woke up and this is just my bedhead kind of a look. So I'm going to add a bunch of these little shark fins. But there are other animals as well in the 100-acre wood here. They're super interesting. They have really interesting stories. Like as well for Piglet, he is our only animal in the 100-acre wood who can read and write. Only at about an elementary school level, but it's still more than, well, Owl likes to pretend. Owl likes to read books upside down, and he makes up a lot of his words. But Piglet, in fact, was so small that Christopher Robin, the real Christopher Robin, could sneak him into his pocket when he went to school, kind of like a comfort blanket. And that's how Piglet learned all of his, well, words. Now, the last thing that we're missing here on our Eeyore is his ears. And his ears are nice and long here, just sitting right beside his head. I'm going to add some extra credit shading here to his hair. But for those ears here, we just want some very, very tall letter C's, starting from his eyebrows and going right down here to his snout. If you remember, his ears are so long that sometimes they even drag on the ground too. So we do want them to be a little bit longer than his actual head shape. And just patting the rest of the ear, we'll bring up a smaller letter C here, right underneath his snout. Now the inner and outer ear fold is definitely one of the easiest. It's just one more big letter C, bringing it right down here to either side of his head. And take a moment, lock in those ears as well. Now Eeyore here, he got his name in a very interesting way. It's not the type of animal he is because he is a donkey, and a lot of the other 100-acre wood characters are kind of just named after what they are. Rabbit, owl, tiger. Kanga and Roo, that one's interesting. It's just kangaroo but spliced into two. But for Eeyore here, he actually got his name because that is a sound a donkey makes. So if you say it real quick to yourself, Eeyore, it kind of sounds like Eeyore. So that is really the idea behind his name. Winnie the Pooh as well is a little bit more of a unique name. It comes from a real black bear that the real Christopher Robin liked to take rides on. Her name was Winnie. But now that we've got those ears here in place, that is everything you need for your very own portrait of Eeyore. Adding a little bit of shading here all throughout his fur here really help kind of make him look that much more complete, since he has a little bit more of that blue-gray tone. But once you've locked in your lines here, you add your shading, find a spot and sign your name, nice and big and proud, so we know whose Eeyore this belongs to. And with